sunny autumnal morning, and a young couple are out walking their dog in the Fontainebleau forest near Paris. They don't know it yet, but they won't make it out alive. This is Crime Dog. Roll the intro. Gilles Naudet and Anne-Sophie Vandamme, both 25 years old, park their car at the entrance to the forest and head off on their hike. They are joined by Dundee, a young Pyrenean sheepdog. They know the forest well and they're used to spending time there walking the numerous trails with their dog. From the car park, they head to the forest for a hike which should have lasted a few hours. But as night falls, Anne-Sophie and Gilles fail to return. After the hike, they had planned to pass by Gilles' parents' house before heading home to Paris. When they fail to show, Gilles' parents don't think for a second that they would have changed their plans without letting them know in advance. A few kilometers away in Bois-le-Roi, the parents are panicking. Back then, of course, no mobile phones, so Madame Naudet goes around all the local hospitals to see if maybe Gilles had been involved in an accident, but there's no sign of it. They spend a sleepless night of worry, and then first thing they head to the forest to look for their son and his fiancée. When they arrive, they spot his white Peugeot 304 parked exactly where they left it, with the doors locked. His parents have a copy of the key, so they open it to see if maybe anything had been stolen, but everything seems normal. By now they are convinced something terrible has happened. They call the police, who arrive on the scene straight away. Gilles knew the forest well. He'd done his military service there, and was known to enjoy a certain hike in particular, so they head in that direction. Their first instinct was that they'd fallen somewhere and were either injured or unable to move. 48 hours go by and there is no sign of the couple or their dog. When officers do some digging, they find nothing to suggest the couple had planned a last-minute escape anywhere. Neither of them were known to have any personal issues or enemies. She was a social worker and he worked in a bank. They had planned to marry in a few months, on the surface a perfectly happy couple. On top of that, their faithful friend Dundee had recently joined the family. 5 days go by and there is no sign, no ransom call, no witness sightings. Could they have just got lost in the forest and taken refuge in one of its many caves? Police question all the local walkers to see if anyone had crossed their path. Something else happened on that day too, which may or may not be connected to our disappearance. On the 31st of October, the day the couple went missing, the hunting season opened. There are 3,000 hectares of forest to cover, so they commence a massive search operation. As many as 600 police, military, and forest personnel take place in the hunt, employing motorbikes, helicopters, and sniffer dogs. They comb the forest, but they are nowhere to be seen. They even send divers into the lakes, but they find nothing. It's finally a phone call that breathes life into the search. 3 kilometers south of where the couple disappeared, walkers confirm having seen the dog Dundee on the afternoon of the 31st of October. They didn't just see him, they spent an hour with him, but he was on his own. So the couple and the dog had been separated. What happened afterwards? Did he just rejoin them? If so, where? With the start of the hunting season, witnesses claim that day there were shots going off in all directions. An agent from the National Forest Office who was on the ground that day reported that a stray bullet had ended up in the side of his car. Could the couple have been hit too? They question all the hunters who were in the area on October the 31st. Some of them have an odd behaviour. Police feel like they're not telling the truth, often contradicting each other and generally refusing to cooperate. According to them, nothing out of the ordinary happened that day. It comes to light that the hunters weren't the only group carrying weapons in the forest that day. They discover there are illegal activities taking place. The forest was infamous for poachers. Men would come to the forest in the middle of the night, shoot animals dead, throw them in the back of their truck, and then leave, ignoring all legal hunting protocol in the process. Detectives introduced night patrols in an attempt to catch these illegal hunters, to try and find out what was going on in the forest in the wee hours of the morning. However, they come up empty-handed. They are almost certain now that if they do find the couple, they won't still be alive. It would have to take an absolute miracle. More than 2 months after the disappearance, hunters are making their way through the forest. A hunting dog is on the trail of an injured boar when suddenly he stops dead next to a tree. Under some branches and heather are the remains of human bodies. Forensics move in and discover the body of a young man, a young woman, and a dog. They await confirmation from the autopsy, but they are pretty sure that it's the young couple and the dog Dundee. The bodies had been there for several weeks. They'd been executed with several gunshot wounds. Anne-Sophie had been shot 3 times in the head, the neck, and the finger, possibly as she attempted to defend herself. Gilles was shot 5 times, 3 in the head, 1 in the neck, one in the shoulder, but the dog was also shot twice. It appears they were firstly wounded and then finished off at close range, with the weapon touching the skin of the victims as they lay on the ground. It's a shocking scene, no mistake, no pity. The dog is ID first thanks to his collar, which includes his address. A few days later, the autopsy confirms the bodies are that of Gilles and Anne-Sophie. The place where the bodies were found is a slightly strange part of the forest. It's on a plateau, very little vegetation, rocks, puddles of water, a place where the animals of the forest would come to quench their thirst. An ideal spot for hunters to wait to take their shot. The lieutenant in charge of the case takes a helicopter over the zone to get a better look, and he makes a fascinating discovery. His attention is immediately drawn to a number of well-worn paths created by the pheasants leading almost exactly to where the bodies were found. Shells found near the body confirm their suspicions. It was a prime spot for hunters to wait for their prey, notably pheasants. On the 17th of May, the hunters are questioned once again. Their weapons are checked and compared with the bullets found in the victims. The most likely scenario at this point was that Dundee was mistaken for a pheasant and killed by either a hunter or a poacher. When the couple reacted angrily, some kind of altercation ensued, and they were killed also. The ballistic report on the shells reveals that 2 separate weapons were used, and the bullets came in from different angles, so it looks like we're looking at 2 shooters. Unfortunately, the weapon is a very common one. It's a .22 long rifle, of which there are 13,000 registered in France. It's also not commonly used as a hunting weapon, so this theory starts to fade as well. It takes officers back in the direction of the poachers. The trouble is they would only operate at night. We would have to assume that our victims were killed in the daytime. It was, however, the first day of the hunt. It is possible they were waiting up on the plateau for the legal hunters to drive the pheasants their way. Officers also find tyre marks from a 4x4 next to the victims, a model often used by poachers. Could they have accidentally shot the dog and then the couple? One aspect of the crime scene doesn't make any sense. The bodies were covered with fresh heather and 2 different varieties. Also, the victims' bodies were found in very unnatural positions. It looks staged. Could the killer have hidden the bodies during the initial search, then placed them back in the forest once searches in that area had been suspended? The victims' clothes were also slightly hunched, as if maybe they were executed close by and then dragged to their final resting place. Surely if the bodies had been there the whole time, someone would have spotted them. The heather barely covers the bodies, so how could they have been missed? They must have been hidden elsewhere. They focus in on an abandoned house in the forest, located close to the start of the trail taken by the couple. They go through the house, and in the basement they find dog and cat hairs. They take them for analysis, but they are unable to determine whether they came from Dundee or not. They interrogate the 4 forest keepers who were working in the area that day. Among them, the man who ended up with a bullet hole in the side of his car. Some investigators wonder if he knows more than he's letting on. Poachers are extremely dangerous people, so maybe that's why he decided to keep quiet. A few years after the incident, the man in question took his own life. The inquiry into his death would conclude that he was severely depressed, and doubt there was a link between his suicide and the murders. After exploring all possible avenues and dedicating huge resources, the case goes cold. It's not until 9 years later that they have a new lead. A Portuguese truck driver, Jose Garcia Barbas, is sentenced to 18 years prison for killing a salesman and then 5 days later 2 tourists right around the Fontainebleau forest. These crimes took place in 1992. Barbas was a seemingly normal guy who killed for no apparent reason or motive. It's alleged he also used the same weapon as the murderer. If it wasn't a hunter or a poacher, another possibility was a mad lone gunman. However, he denies being involved, and given they have no solid evidence, the lead goes nowhere. Desperate to get a result, they pay a visit to the FBI and some of their profilers. They're trying to ascertain who they're looking for. They leave America confident that they are looking for poachers. According to the profilers, most likely related, maybe a father and son. The inquiry has now been going for 10 years and they are no closer to finding the killer or killers. Until January 1999, when a new witness drops a bombshell. An elderly lady told this person that her grandson may have been involved in the murder, and on the 11th of February they arrest 28-year-old Cedric Mabi, 17 when the murders happened, but currently studying weapons and criminology in Montpellier. They also arrest his father, Jean Bernard, and a third man, Marcel Blando, a friend of the family. In the village, Cedric was nicknamed Rambo. Let it go. And he learnt to poach with his neighbour Marcel. He would spend all day in the forest dressed in military attire. He knows the area very well, and he also drives a jeep with tyre marks very similar to those found next to the victims. He initially denies any involvement, but after a few hours, he cracks and confesses. His confession, however, is confusing. He changes his story several times, claiming he was with his father, then with his friend, then in the end saying he acted alone. It's unclear whether he's telling the truth, but he does give them some explicit details that weren't available to the public, such as a red backpack one of the victims was carrying and the position of the bodies. Whichever version we are supposed to believe, he states that the whole thing was a big accident. He also explains that he modified his weapon after the fact, so when the police did the checks, it didn't match up with his gun. It all seems a bit sketchy, and a few days later he retracts his confession, saying he was coerced by the police. Unfortunately, at the time nothing was recorded, so it's impossible to know if he was telling the truth. It's his word against theirs. Regardless, he goes on trial in 2001. The defense claim that the confession was beaten out of him. Plus, they have no murder weapon and no real proof. He also has an alibi. Apparently he was with his girlfriend all day. All these points stand up and Cedric is acquitted. He fit the profile, but they had no hard evidence to link him to the murder. I get a distinct whiff of desperation from the police force. It looks like they may have forced him into a confession, hoping it would be enough to secure a conviction. To this day, no other leads have come to light. The case is now officially cold, and it would take some new information or another witness to come forward to change that. I am desperate to find out what happened to poor Gilles, Anne-Sophie, and of course Dundee. In recent years, there have been a growing number of accidents in France involving hunters, so could this have been a simple accident which was then covered up? Given the number of gunshot wounds and the suspicious circumstances in which the bodies were found, this seems unlikely. That makes me lean more towards the lone gunman, but there are problems with that theory too, as the ballistics report stated there were 2 shooters. Let me know in the comments what you think happened. Subscribe if you want to see more Crime Dog. We release new videos every week. You can also support us on Patreon and check out this other crazy video, which may or may not involve some dodgy hunters. Until next time, stay safe and look after yourselves.